Hey friends, welcome back to my kitchen. A couple of weeks ago, I shared a video where I unboxed and gave you my first impressions of a new Kusori dehydrator, their biggest one, 10 tray dehydrator. And so far I have been loving playing with it. And in this video, I am going to attempt to dehydrate some egg whites and to make some egg white powder. And towards the end of the video, I am going to experiment with actually baking a loaf of egg white bread with that egg white powder to see if it will work. So typically the egg white powders that you buy, online, typically they're not in the grocery store, but the ones that you buy online from like Now Foods or bulk supplements, different brands like that, they are spray dried. So they have a machine that sprays the egg whites and dries them at the same time. So it's a little bit different of a process than what I'm going to be doing, which is, putting them on like a silicone pan in my dehydrator and just drying them out like with the fan. So I'm not 100% sure that it's going to work out exactly the same. I also am not 100% sure how the dehydrated egg white powder that I make is going to correlate to the measurement and weight of the spray dried egg white powder that you buy online. So what I did to make sure that I got somewhat equivalent amounts, like in the recipe that I make with my dehydrated egg whites, I want it to have the same amount of protein, the same amount of calories as the 100 grams of packaged egg white powder that you would buy. So I figured out that 100 grams of egg white powder, I used the Now brand as the example because the nutrition facts vary just slightly. So I just decided to use the Now brand as my example. The 100 grams of Now brand egg whites correlated to about 770 grams of liquid or fresh egg whites. That with my eggs, and I have a variety of sized eggs because they come from our own chickens, but that ended up being about 24 eggs. So that's a little bit eye-opening right there. Just that 100 grams of egg white powder, which is about around a cup, is 24 egg whites. People complain a lot about egg white powder being expensive, and when you're comparing it to the cost of like bread flour, yes, it does seem way more expensive. But when you're actually realizing that there's 24 egg whites in that 1 cup of egg white powder, you realize real fast that you're not going to save a lot of money by buying egg whites and dehydrating them yourself. All right, enough talk about all of this. I have 24 eggs right here. Like I said, these are from our chickens. And I already told you that about 770 grams of fresh egg whites equals 100 grams of egg white powder. And so what I did, because I've already done one batch that I will pull out here in a minute through the magic of television, it will already be ready. But I'm going to show you the whole process that I did from the beginning. But what I did and what I'm going to do here for you in just a second is about 800 grams of fresh egg whites, because I figure I will lose a little bit, like with the fan blowing and the dehydrator, some will get blown away when I powder it in my Vitamix. Some will get lost and, left in the Vitamix. So I just wanted a little bit more than that 770 grams to make sure I end up with the equivalent of 770 grams of fresh egg whites for the loaf of bread that I'm going to be making. So now the laborious task of just separating the eggs. This is my jar for the yolks that I will save and probably make into egg yolk waffles. I'll do a big batch of those, stick them in the freezer, and they'll be easy breakfasts. I don't tend to use as much egg yolk powder as I use egg white powder, so I wasn't motivated to make a whole bunch of egg yolk powder out of all of the yolks. I am going to be separating my eggs and get my whites into a small jar before I dump them into the big jar, because if the yolk happens to break, I don't want to get a little bit of yolk or fat into the egg whites, because obviously egg whites don't whip up if you get that little bit of fat in there. So just to be on the safe side, I'm using the small jar, and then I'll be periodically dumping it into the bigger jar. And I have the big jar on my scale here so I can see when I get to about 800 grams of liquid egg whites. There are tons of ways to separate eggs. You don't need any special contraptions for it, but I find that this little egg separator is helpful. You can just use the shell. You can break all of your eggs into a big bowl and then kind of just with your hands scoop out the egg yolks. Whatever works for you is great. I will link this little tool down below because I do find it fairly helpful. A quick break to say thank you to Element for sponsoring today's video. Element's electrolyte formulation is science-backed, and they have in each packet 1,000 milligrams of sodium, 200 milligrams of potassium, and 60 milligrams of magnesium. This is a great ratio to keep you hydrated, whether you're an athlete or you're a stay-at-home mom, or you're just someone trying to get over a cold and stay extra hydrated. I typically find that I just need 1 stick per day to feel my best. But if I am, under the weather or doing a lot of physical activity, I will up it to 2 for sure. Element has a bunch of fruity, refreshing flavors, but right now they also have their seasonal chocolate medley pack that has chocolate mint, chocolate caramel, and chocolate salt in there, so you can do all kinds of hot, festive drinks with those. You can enjoy getting your electrolytes in with nice, warm, cozy drinks rather than like cold, refreshing drinks like we would normally like in the summertime. Right now, Element is offering my viewers a special deal. If you use my link down below, you can get a free sample pack of all of their regular flavors with any Element order. This is a perfect way to try all the different flavors or pass this on to a friend. Make a great stocking stuffer. To get this deal, you just need to go through my link. It's drinkelement.com/indigo. That's DRINKLMNT.com/indigo. Thanks so much to Element for sponsoring this video, and now back to the recipe. So it took exactly 2 dozen eggs this time, and I got right above 800. I'm gonna keep it there. I got my nice giant jar of egg yolks ready for egg yolk waffles. I am going to grab my immersion blender and just give this a quick blend so it's completely liquidy. Break up all of the membranes and whatever is in those egg whites that make them hold together. Okay, so I definitely do recommend dumping in the egg whites or anything liquid you're going to dehydrate while the trays are already in the dehydrator. So I'm just going to put half on each of these trays. Oh, and I wanted to mention that I got these silicone trays on Amazon, and I got 2 packs of 4. So I'm going to use 2 trays today, but I could make 4 times the amount of egg white powder that I'm making today. So enough for 4 loaves at a time in this dehydrator. And I will link to these down below. They are 14 by 14 inch, so they fit just really, really well into this dehydrator. And they are dirty because I just pulled the first batch of the dried egg whites off of here, and I figured what's the point in washing it and just getting it dirty again? So that's why it already looks a little dirty. So I'm just gonna try to get half of it on here without making too much of a mess. About half. Slide it in. All right, and the other half is just going to go in here. I think I accidentally bumped the start button already because my dehydrator just started. Oops. All right, closing that up. We'll start it over here. So I am using the instructions in my recipe book for whole dehydrated eggs. They said 145 degrees for 10 hours. And I was wondering if that was going to be enough, like with the thickness of the egg whites in here, but it ended up working fine. 10 hours was perfect on the 145 degrees. So I'm just going to hit start and let it do its thing for 10 hours. And through the magic of television, this is how it looks after 10 hours. Everything is completely dry and crusty. The girls said that it looked like fingernails and they were completely grossed out. But what I did is I just transferred all of the dried egg whites, at least as much as I could get off of the trays, into a bowl, and I put them in the freezer because the recipe for dehydrated egg whites in the recipe book said to put them in the freezer for an hour before you blend them into powder. And it has been an hour now, and these are fresh out of the freezer. So I have my Vitamix set up here, and I'm gonna go ahead and get these blended up and see how powdery I can get them. I don't want to lose any. So much work, I don't want to waste any. There's what it looks like. It definitely looks, it's not quite as fine as the regular egg white powder in the bags. Up here at the top, it looks about as fine. So like the powder that's been, you know, floating around looks about as fine, but down at the bottom, it's still a little bit granulated and a little bit shiny. I wonder if I should blend it some more. I'm going to try to blend it just a little bit more and see what happens. It's still yellow down at the bottom, and it's got like a top layer of the really fine powder, but it definitely looks a lot finer than it was. So I think that I'm going to call that good. It looks pretty similar to egg white powder that you'd buy. Maybe a little more yellow. Okay, look at that. I'm right at 105.7 grams. So very, very close to that 100 grams. That's what it looks like. And I am just going to go ahead and get my other ingredients in here and then take it over to the KitchenAid. And that's when the real test will happen to see if it whips up. If we can't get beyond the soup stage, then I think this will be a fail. But if we can get it to whip up to stiff peaks, I think this will be a win. I'm going to be doing my basic recipe, the one with butter powder and a little bit of yolk powder. I'm not going to do the yeast. I'm not going to do the proofing. I'm not going to do the shredded butter. I just wanted to go back to like my most basic loaf recipe, which is the one that I typically start with when I'm doing any kind of experimentation. It's kind of like my baseline for my best loaf, and then from there I experiment. So that's what I'm doing. So it has the 100 grams of the egg white powder. I'm going to use 2 tablespoons of arrowroot, and in this recipe that is optional. I'm going to have a teaspoon of gelatin, 1/4 of a cup of allulose, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1.5 teaspoons of cream of tartar to give it kind of a sourdough-ish taste. If you don't like that taste, you can reduce it down to 1/2 teaspoon and still get the stabilizing effect on the egg whites. Of course, I'm also going to be adding water. And then at the end, after it's whipped up, if it does, I will be adding some butter powder, 1/4 of a cup, and a teaspoon of the dried egg yolks. I'm also going to go ahead and optimistically preheat my oven to 325. All right, going to take this over to the KitchenAid, and it'll be time for the moment of truth. Here we go. Well, I'd say that whipped up, and actually it whipped up super fast. It only took about 3 minutes to get to this point, and there are some very, very stiff peaks in there. So I'm going to go ahead and add my 1/4 of a cup of butter powder, or 24 grams, and I'm just going to get that mixed up until it's thoroughly mixed, not whip it at this point, and just 1 teaspoon of the yolk powder. So look at how incredibly thick this is. I mean, it's like super thick whipped cream texture. So I would say it's not it's a little bit different. So I'm interested to see what the end result of the bread will be. I have my pan all lined with parchment paper. So I'm gonna get this spread in there and then throw it in the oven and then see what happens. So it doesn't seem to be quite as much volume of batter as normal. And it seems super, super thick, like the way that whipped cream would be almost before it turns into butter. So I'm gonna throw this into my oven for 40 minutes, 325 degrees, and we'll be back to see how it turns out. All right, that looks like a loaf of bread. It feels nice and firm. So far so good. We'll let this cool all the way, see if we get any kind of shrinkage, and then give it a slice and see what it looks like. I am pretty happy with how this loaf looks on the outside at least. You can see the sides didn't really cave in. The bottom is still flat. Looks pretty good. Next time I might, try to do a score on the top to get it to crack where I want it to. But all in all, looks like a pretty good loaf of bread. So I'm excited to cut into it and see what we see. All right. It is super soft. The texture is pretty nice. It's got some big bubbles in there. It's a little bit tighter, besides those big bubbles. It's a little bit tighter than the regular recipe with the regular egg white powder. And I think that must just be because the batter was so much thicker. I wonder if I could get away with a little bit less of the homemade egg white powder. I am not sure why it made the batter so much thicker when I put about the same amount in as regular, but that might be something I could play with. I mean, it would be great if I could get a really nice texture of bread with using less of the powder, because that's less work, less money. But all in all, this does not look like a bad loaf of bread. It is not to the point of memory foam. It still has some nice big bubbles, and I am actually very happy with it. I just need to taste it, that's all. We'll do the mush test here, which it definitely passes. We got the fingerprint, still stays there. And there's a rip for you. And let me give it a quick taste. The taste is really good. It's really clean. I wasn't sure if there would be a difference with, dehydrating your own eggs as far as the eggy taste or flavor, but it tastes super clean. Doesn't taste like eggs at all to me. The texture is just that little bit denser, so you kind of have that as part of the mouthfeel. But besides that, it's really good. It's really tasty. I don't think the texture is choky at all, although people have different opinions about what constitutes a choky texture or not. But for me, I think it's pretty equivalent to my other recipes with the regular egg white powder. So I am definitely going to keep playing with dehydrating my own egg whites. Since we do have chickens, sometimes we have eggs that pile up. Honestly, it's not cheaper for us to dehydrate our own egg whites to make egg white powder because of how much it costs to feed and keep our chickens. Sometimes the eggs do pile up, and so I need to use them for something. So I will be playing with it more. But for me, unless prices continue to rise, I think it's still worth it as far as the convenience and even the cost to buy egg white powder from Amazon or Roseacre Farms or wherever. But I do hope that this is helpful for those of you that are in countries where you absolutely cannot get egg white powder or where the egg white powder is exponentially more expensive. So if you're not able to get your hands on egg white powder, but you do have a dehydrator, you do have an option. It is possible. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again in the next one.